You think you have everything you ever wanted. A home, a family, a life that seems perfect on the surface. You've worked hard to build it all, piece by piece, brick by brick. David, my husband, is everything I could have asked for, loving, supportive, always there when I need him. We've created a world together, one I thought was unshakable. But here's the truth no one talks about: perfection is fragile. It's not always the big dramatic moments that break you. It's the quiet, unnoticed moments, the ones you let slip by without realizing what they're doing to you. You start to feel like you're living in someone else's life, a life that doesn't quite fit you anymore. And then, one night, one decision, one moment of weakness, and everything changes. You thought you knew who you were, who you loved, but you find yourself staring at a reflection you barely recognize. And the worst part? You never saw it coming. My name is Emma. I'm 35 years old, a mother of two, and the wife of a man I thought I knew better than anyone. But somewhere, in the middle of the routines, the responsibilities, the never-ending tasks of being a mother and a wife, I lost myself. I didn't mean for it to happen. I never thought I could betray everything I believed in. But when I look back, I realize the cracks were always there. And the worst part is, I didn't notice them until it was too late. A chance meeting, one evening, at a networking event David had insisted we attend. I didn't expect much. It was the usual crowd, business people, clients, and the kind of small talk I'd become so accustomed to. But then, I saw him. Josh. He was standing across the room, laughing with a few colleagues, but the moment our eyes met, everything around us faded. For a split second, it felt like the world stopped moving. He hadn't changed much, still the same boyish charm, the same easy smile, but there was something different about him now. His presence felt different. As if he noticed me, really noticed me, in a way that felt almost forbidden. I told myself it was nothing, that I was imagining things. After all, it's just Josh, right? Just a familiar face from my past. But there it was, that look. The one that sent a small shiver down my spine, the kind that made me feel alive again, even if just for a second. The weight of my own life, the predictable monotony, the distant moments with David, suddenly felt unbearable. I shouldn't have been thinking this way. I shouldn't have been feeling this way. He approached me, the casual conversation we shared felt almost surreal. We spoke about work, about old friends, and our families. Yet, beneath it all, the unspoken energy hung in the air. There was something in his smile, something in the way his eyes lingered just a little too long on mine. I wasn't blind, I knew he was attracted to me. I could see it in his eyes, hear it in his voice, even though he tried to keep it casual. I didn't want to admit it, but I felt it too. That spark, that rush of excitement, something I hadn't felt in so long. But the most dangerous part? The part that should have had me running the other way? I didn't want it to stop. I wanted to feel noticed, wanted, desired, alive. I told myself it was harmless. After all, nothing had happened. But deep down, a dangerous seed had been planted, and I couldn't shake the thought of it. I couldn't stop wondering, what would it be like if I let this feeling go further? We parted ways that night with promises to catch up soon, nothing more. But as I lay in bed later, staring at the ceiling, I couldn't help but replay the night over and over in my mind. His gaze. His touch on my arm as we spoke. I could still feel it, the heat from that fleeting moment. I realized then that something inside me had shifted. I was no longer satisfied with the life I had. The warmth from Josh's look made me question everything, my marriage, my desires, my identity. I wasn't sure where this path would lead, but one thing was clear: I had just taken the first step towards something I could never undo. It had been months since I'd felt like me. I was a mother, a wife, a caretaker, but somewhere along the way, the woman who used to live freely, confidently, had disappeared. Kate had noticed it long before I did. She'd seen the weight of my responsibilities crushing me. So, when she called me up one Thursday night, urging me to join her for a drink, I didn't hesitate. It wasn't like I had forgotten how to enjoy myself, it's just that somewhere between the PDA meetings and school pickups, I had misplaced the part of me that used to live for the moment. Kate wasn't going to let me forget. We went to a dimly lit bar downtown, the kind that was quiet enough to have a real conversation, but busy enough to feel alive. It was nothing extraordinary, but to me, it felt like an escape. The weight of the world, David's distant gaze, the kids' endless needs, my own exhaustion, melted away with each sip. The tension in my shoulders slowly disappeared, and the woman who had been buried beneath layers of responsibility began to resurface. I could breathe again. We laughed. We reminisced. I could feel my mind lifting out of the fog, and for the first time in so long, I felt something that didn't involve duty or expectations. The buzz from the alcohol was subtle, but it was enough to unlock something deep within me. I could hear Kate's voice, but it felt distant, as if I wasn't really present in that conversation. Instead, I was noticing everything else, the soft hum of the music, the warm glow of the lights, the sharp scent of cologne in the air. And then, I saw him. Josh. Again. He was leaning against the bar, his eyes scanning the crowd, but as soon as he caught sight of me, that look, the same intense, searching look, was back. This time, there was no question in his gaze. It was clear he saw me, not as a wife or a mother, but as her, the woman I used to be. He smiled, and the world around me seemed to narrow. My heart skipped, and before I could stop myself, I found myself moving towards him. "Didn't think I'd see you again," he said, his voice low, almost a whisper, but it held a promise. A secret. "I didn't either," I replied, but the words felt hollow. The truth was, I couldn't look away. Not anymore. The way he looked at me, the way he made me feel seen, it was like waking up from a long sleep. We exchanged small talk, but it didn't feel small. Each word was laced with something more, something dangerous. Josh's smile never faltered, and the more I spoke, the more I found myself letting go. Each sip of my drink made me feel bolder, lighter, less tethered to the life I had built. Then, without thinking, I let the moment stretch. I moved a little closer. Just enough that I could feel the heat from his body radiating into mine. It wasn't a flirtation at first. At least, that's what I told myself. It was just a conversation. But when he reached out and touched my arm, just a fleeting, casual brush of his fingers, I felt it. A spark. Like a live wire running through me. I pulled back, my breath catching in my throat. This wasn't me. It wasn't who I was. But then, something inside me whispered that maybe it was. Josh didn't say anything. He just watched me, his gaze never wavering. The silence between us wasn't uncomfortable. It was charged, filled with possibility. I could hear the music again, louder now, and everything around me felt like it was happening in a dream. Before I knew it, I found myself leaning in, my lips brushing against his, tentative at first, but then deeper, more urgent. The kiss was everything I hadn't realized I was missing. For a moment, I forgot who I was supposed to be. And then, as quickly as it began, I pulled away. "I shouldn't be doing this," I whispered, my voice shaky. Josh didn't answer. Instead, he just looked at me, waiting, like he knew exactly what I was feeling. Like he knew what I wanted before I even had the courage to admit it. I felt exposed. Vulnerable. But I also felt alive, more alive than I had in years. And that, more than anything else, scared me. I had crossed a line, one I didn't even realize existed. This wasn't just about a kiss anymore. It was about the woman I had become, the woman I didn't recognize in the mirror. The woman who was just as desperate for freedom as she was for love. I had only meant to escape for a moment. But that moment? It had changed everything. The first thing I noticed when I opened my eyes was the silence. The kind of silence that felt too loud, too heavy. I was no longer in the dimly lit bar or the electric rush of Josh's touch. I was in a strange, unfamiliar bed, the covers tangled around my legs, and the weight of what had happened crashing over me in waves. I tried to piece together the night, but the fragments didn't fit. The kiss, the way Josh had looked at me with such intent, how it felt to be touched by someone who didn't see me as just a wife or a mother, but as a woman. The guilt gnawed at me, deep in the pit of my stomach, but so did something else, something I couldn't ignore. Something that told me I was alive in a way I hadn't been in years. The sound of Josh's breath beside me was steady, calm, and I turned to look at him, lying next to me, his body still and peaceful. But I felt anything but peaceful. I felt like I was drowning in the very moment I had once sought. I wanted to run. I wanted to flee from the mess I had made, but I couldn't. I was frozen, staring at the ceiling, wondering what had become of the life I thought I was building. How could I have done this? To David, to myself? I slipped out of the bed, careful not to wake him, but the cold reality of the situation wrapped itself around me. I needed to leave. I needed to get back to my life, to my family, but I knew it wasn't that simple. I had crossed a line I could never uncross. As I gathered my things in a daze, Josh stirred, lifting his head to look at me with those dark, understanding eyes. "Emma," he said, his voice thick with sleep. "Where are you going?" The question hung in the air between us like a threat, and for a moment, I wondered if I could go through with leaving. Could I walk away from what felt so alive, so intense, even though it was wrong? I met his gaze, but words failed me. Instead, I nodded stiffly. "I need to go home." Josh didn't try to stop me. He just nodded, as though he had expected this from the very beginning. And I left. The drive home felt like I was in a fog. I could barely remember the route I'd taken. I felt disconnected from everything around me, the streetlights blurring in the rain, the sound of tires skimming across wet pavement. I wasn't sure if I was still the woman who had kissed Josh, who had thrown away everything in a single moment. My mind kept circling back to the same question: who am I now? The woman who was loyal, dependable, the one who took care of everything? Or was I someone entirely different now, someone who had tasted freedom and couldn't deny it? I thought of David. Of his quiet smile, his touch that had once made me feel like I was his world. What had happened to us? What had happened to me? When I finally pulled into the driveway, I sat in the car for a moment, staring at the house. The house that used to be my sanctuary. The house where I had promised to build a life with David, the life I'd worked so hard for. But now, the thought of stepping inside felt suffocating. My hand hovered over the door handle. I should go inside. I should face my husband, face the reality of what I'd done. But the weight of the night loomed over me like a shadow, and I couldn't breathe. I finally stepped out of the car, my body stiff, my heart pounding with the fear of what would happen when David saw me. He didn't know. He couldn't know. How could I explain what I had done? How could I justify this to him, to myself? I walked inside, every step feeling like an eternity. The house was quiet. Too quiet. David was sitting at the kitchen table, sipping his coffee, the morning paper spread out in front of him. He looked up when I entered, his eyes tired, but still kind. "Morning," he said, his voice soft. "Morning," I managed to whisper, my throat tight. For a long moment, we just stood there, staring at each other. I wanted to say something, anything to bridge the gap that had grown between us without my even realizing it. But I couldn't. My mouth was dry, my mind a mess of confusion and guilt. David smiled faintly, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You okay?" he asked, his voice gentle but laced with concern. I wanted to say yes. I wanted to tell him that everything was fine, that last night was just a slip, that it meant nothing. But I couldn't lie to him. Not now. Not after what had happened. So I did what I could. I smiled. A smile that didn't reach my eyes either. "Yeah, just tired." But the words felt empty. I felt empty. The rest of the day passed in a haze. I tried to act normal, but every word, every gesture from David felt like a reminder of what I had just done. I watched him, and I couldn't stop thinking about how little I had been noticed by him in recent months. How he had become distant in his own way, and yet, I still loved him. But I also felt something else, something I hadn't felt in a long time. And that feeling, whatever it was what scared me most. The truth was, I was no longer sure what I wanted. I had crossed a line I didn't know how to return from. And now, every look, every word, felt like an echo of a life I wasn't sure I could keep living. I was standing at the edge of something I couldn't control, and I didn't know if I was ready to face the consequences. But deep down, I knew that facing them was the only way I could ever begin to move forward. I stared at my phone in disbelief. The message from Josh was sitting there, unread, taunting me. All I needed to do was tap on it, and I could have everything I thought I wanted. The excitement, the passion, the freedom I hadn't felt in years. The chance to escape, to live in the moment, to forget the humdrum of my life with David. For a split second, I was tempted to pick up the phone and let Josh pull me back into his world, one where I wasn't a wife, a mother, a woman defined by routines and responsibilities. But was that really what I wanted? Could I really walk away from the life I'd built, from everything I thought I was supposed to want? The reality of my situation hit me harder than I expected. David wasn't perfect. We both knew that. But at least with him, there was history. There were memories. There were 2 children who depended on us. Walking away from him now, after everything we'd been through, felt like betrayal on an entirely different level. It wasn't just the affair, it was the life I had built, the promises I had made. Could I really leave that behind? But then, as if the universe was pulling me in a new direction, I reached out to Josh. I had to know. I needed to hear it from him. Would he even want me back? Or was I just another notch in the belt of a man who moved on without a second thought? When I reached out to him, I didn't get the response I expected. "I've met someone else," Josh wrote back. "I'm sorry, Emma. But it's over." It was never meant to be anything more than a distraction. I blinked at the words. The whole affair had meant nothing to him. It was a temporary escape for him, something that came and went like a summer fling. But for me, it had felt like a lifeline, a way out of the suffocating routine. The realization hit me like a freight train. The illusion of escape that I had been chasing wasn't even mine to claim. It was a fleeting moment, and Josh had moved on, just like that. I had given away parts of myself, parts that I would never get back, for nothing. I was devastated, yes, but there was also a strange sense of clarity. I had been chasing something that didn't exist. The freedom I thought I would find in Josh, the passion, the escape, had all been a mirage. It had been my own need for validation, my own emptiness that had made me crave something that wasn't real. I wasn't just running from my marriage. I was running from myself. The pain of betrayal was still raw, but it made me realize something important. I had neglected to see the cracks in my marriage that had formed over the years. The love I thought was still there with David had turned into something different, something unfamiliar. But what was I going to do now? Could I repair what had been broken? Was it even worth fixing? The truth hit me harder than I could have imagined. I had hurt David, yes, but I had also hurt myself. And the only way to begin healing was to confront it all. I couldn't pretend anymore. I couldn't hide behind excuses, behind the "just one mistake" that I had used to justify my actions. It was time to come clean. It was time to own up to what I had done and to face the consequences. I took a deep breath and looked at David, who was sitting on the couch, staring into space. His silence said everything. I knew he had been waiting for me to say something. Waiting for me to confess. And now, I had to. There was no more running. "David," I whispered, my voice trembling. "I need to tell you something. I've made a huge mistake. I had an affair. It wasn't just one kiss, David. I let it go too far. I've been lying to you, and I can't do that anymore." He looked at me, his expression unreadable, his eyes void of emotion. And that silence. The silence I had been avoiding for so long was deafening. Have you ever found yourself standing at a crossroads in your relationship, torn between two lives? Where every choice feels like the wrong one, and the weight of your decisions is too heavy to carry. If you've been in Emma's shoes, or if you're facing a difficult choice in your own life, I want to hear your story. What would you do in Emma's situation? Take the leap and risk it all, or stay and fight for what's left? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you felt the weight of Emma's journey, if you've ever struggled with the consequences of your choices, hit that like button, subscribe, and share this with someone who might need to hear it. These real-life confessions can be uncomfortable, but they're the stories that shape us, the ones that make us question everything we thought we knew. So make sure you're here for the next chapter, subscribe now and turn on notifications. The twists are just getting started, and trust me, you won't want to miss it. Let's talk about love, mistakes, and what it takes to rebuild from the ashes.